Welcome to the McDonald Homecare Podcast series, Ep03.
Welcome everyone. I'm really excited about today actually because up to this stage we've been speaking about care, the care sector, about living care, about people being able to live in their own homes and things about COVID. So it's just really nice now to actually have a guest speaker with us who I'll introduce now, who actually has a real life story from a family's perspective, from a family's own care journey in regards to their mother. So I just want to welcome Kate. Welcome to the podcast, Kate.
Hi, Leigh.
You okay?
Yeah, fine, thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I guess every person, Kate, receiving care has their own life story, as does every family that is involved in this process. So it's just going to be really nice to hear from you and your own family journey, and maybe starting with sort of a backstory of your mother Dora's sort of journey into care and your involvement as a family with that, really.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's absolutely fine. It's been an interesting journey. I'm one of three daughters. Myself and Sue live locally in Petersfield, and my other sister lives quite a long way away, a couple of hours away. So she's not been quite so involved in supporting Mum, done what she can, but obviously with lockdown, that's made things even more difficult. Yeah. That's our background. Mum's lived in Petersfield 40 years. She's always been a very strong, independent businesswoman, very involved in the local community, always looked after herself, done lots of voluntary work. And we noticed about 5 years ago that Mum was becoming quite forgetful, confused over basic things like appointments, dates, times, forgetting birthdays, things like that she would have always remembered very easily, and started finding day-to-day tasks more difficult. Just simple things to start with. She talked a lot about things not working properly, like the washing machine's broken and the television's broken and the cooker's not working. So we'd start off by looking at all of those things and replacing all those things, getting new televisions, and started realising that actually it wasn't the equipment that wasn't working properly, but Mum just finding it more difficult to actually operate those things. And also things like driving. She's always been able to drive everywhere herself, take herself to appointments, and we noticed a few bumps and scratches on the car.
Oops.
Yep, things like that. And when she actually mentioned driving through Herne Farm and knocking someone's wing mirror, we decided that was the time that we needed to stop driving. And
I know, just, sorry to interrupt, but I know that is a big deal for a lot of people. I know myself with supporting older people for many years now that they're driving, the independence through driving, but when the families do need to step in at that stage, obviously they have to, but yes. It's a difficult one.
It was a huge one, actually, the car situation, because when you take a car away from someone, you really take away their independence. And obviously that made a big impact for us as well, because suddenly we had to step in and provide that transport support that we didn't need to in the past. So, that was a big decision. And I think a lot of people agonise over that one. You suddenly become aware that your parents aren't driving perhaps as well as they had done in the past. Since we met you, Leigh, that number of times Mum mentioned my daughters took my car away from me.
Yes, that's always been a great bone of contention in communicating, but it's been quite fun.
Yeah, so that was very difficult. And we were aware as a family that things were not the same with Mum. But at that stage, it was very difficult to really identify what the problem was. And we did take Mum to the doctors, but because of the nature of dementia, sometimes people are absolutely fine and sometimes they're not.
Yeah, of course.
So it took some time for us actually to get a diagnosis. But when we did get that diagnosis, I think things began to change quite a lot for the better, because we knew what we were dealing with, and a lot of support then starts kicking in at that stage that you're not even aware is available to you. For example, there are mental health support teams in the area who suddenly start contacting you and saying, how can we help? Or this is how we can help. And there are various different things. For example, the fire brigade came and set up alarm systems for Mum, vibrating alarm systems, so that if, God forbid, there should be a fire, it would alert her without necessarily making a noise, because unfortunately her hearing had gone as well, so she couldn't hear smoke alarms. But actually that was invaluable, because as Mum became more forgetful and was leaving things on the stove, we actually did on 2 occasions have potential serious fire situations.
Wow. Okay.
And she then became a high priority case for them. She went on, once she'd been diagnosed, she went on a system where they were on call very, very quickly. Should the alarm go off, they'd be alerted, they'd be here. And yes, we got to know Fire Brigade. They were fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
But other support systems, they tell you about calendars and clocks that you can use, and remote controls, and phone systems, and Meals on Wheels, and all of that sort of thing that you might not necessarily be aware of, and the importance of having powers of attorney in place, which we did actually have, but I don't think a lot of people necessarily would have. So that support was really, really helpful.
So it was really until that official diagnosis sort of came out through your local GP.
Yes.
That's when the world expanded of care, you're saying.
Yes.
So you are now sort of connected with different areas of support.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And there are various medications that you can take, which we decided not to go down that route for various different reasons. Yeah. But until you had that diagnosis, you weren't aware that was even available. But we had lots of, as I say, telephone calls, and before COVID, meetings with various different people that came, and online telephone support, because once you go into the world of dementia and Alzheimer's, it's really quite scary. We're aware of it. It's the biggest killer out there, dementia, but we're not trained in what to do for the best to help Mum. So when various different things happened, and we thought, well, how do we best handle this? Those support services were there to guide us.
Brilliant.
And I have to say, the Alzheimer's Society are fantastic as well.
Yeah.
Really helpful. You can phone them up and say, what do I do about this? Because one of the problems we had was that Mum was in complete denial that there was anything wrong at all. She felt that she was absolutely fine, and she was very, very capable of managing herself. She could look after herself, and she didn't need any help at all. Mm-hmm. And that was a difficult one to navigate. How do we, without frightening her, explain to her that actually she does need some help, but still help her maintain her independence?
I think it'd be interesting to know, or interest for the listeners to know. So when you talk about when Dora was officially diagnosed with dementia, how did she respond to that?
Well, we actually made the decision not to tell her, because it was about the time where Barbara Windsor was in the news, quite high profile because of her dementia. And I think mums from the generation where they see that type of illness as the mad disease.
Right. Yeah.
And she actually commented, that lady has that mad disease, that mad illness. And we didn't want to frighten her by telling her that she had that. So we decided not to tell her. We have told her now, because there was initially a bit of resistance in accepting help. I'm not sure whether she remembers, to be honest.
Yeah, of course.
But she does have Alzheimer's, and we don't want to keep telling her she's got it, because we don't want to distress her. So, yeah, I think for some people it's very helpful to know. Mm. It's very helpful for us to know that was what we were dealing with, but not necessarily, we didn't feel important that she was aware.
No, definitely. I think it helps a lot for families. I think when it's not so much the label, but it's the you almost got a trail of where to go.
Exactly.
And what supports our, like you said, the Alzheimer's Society. And it sort of just helps you navigate, doesn't it, really?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because, if someone had cancer, you'd go to a cancer specialist to get help.
Yes.
And this is a mental illness, and we're aware of it, but you don't necessarily know what to do when someone's being diagnosed with it. You need that help.
Oh, okay. That's fantastic backstory. I really appreciate that. Okay. I know it's it's just great to, I'm sure the listeners will resonate a lot with just that, having their own family members.
Yes.
Potentially, both even now or maybe in the future, just even picking up on those subtleties, when you talk about the driving, or you talk about things being left on the hob, or the washing machine, things not working well, but it's just picking up on those things, and it's giving people a bit of awareness of maybe even to look out for loved ones who are living by themselves, who may be sort of more and more forgetful, or maybe undiagnosed conditions like dementia.
Yes, because obviously at 87, you're aware that things aren't going to be as good as they always were. But it's that crossover between just normal old age and actually there may be something else going on here.
moving on then, so what would you highlight as the main challenges you faced as a family in finding the right type of care service? Because obviously you've got to the stage where, you're doing everything, connecting these support elements together, like you said, the fire service, Alzheimer's Society, getting stopping the drive and sort of things. So when did you make the decision, actually, this is too much for just us as a family to manage, and sort of what that stage of the journey for you guys?
Yeah. Well, we were having carers coming in several times a day to help with various different things. And that worked for a while, but then we became aware that that was not enough. And it was really when COVID hit about March last year, when Mum became very confused, and actually became unwell. Unfortunately, I think it's quite common that elderly people suffer with urinary tract infections.
Yes.
And she was getting those quite regularly. And when she became unwell and started calling in the middle of the night, and being very confused and concerned, we realised that we needed to up. Carers coming in a few times a day wasn't enough. So we started looking at the options, and I guess the fundamental options, there's 3 options. Either Mum moved in with us or we moved in with Mum, a nursing home, or living care. And those were the 3 options for us. So we started with the one that we thought Mum would prefer the most, which is us moving in with her.
Yes.
Because her moving in with us was not really achievable, because Mum's got a dog, and we've got our own families and our own children, yes. And that was just not going to work. Mm-hmm. So my sister and I moved in temporarily and took it in turns to stay with Mum to look after her, because she really needed that much more one-to-one, round-the-clock care. And we did that for a few weeks, but we quickly realised that was not sustainable. I worked full-time, my sister was working, we've got our own families, we've got our own children, we've got our own responsibilities, and to be honest, it was absolutely exhausting. We were on our knees and just realising that we couldn't cope with that longer term. It was all right for a short while, but that was not going to work. So we were then left with the 2 options, which is nursing home or living care. So we started researching those, visiting nursing homes, looking online, and we ideally would have wanted Mum to stay at home. She wanted to stay at home. She'd always said that she'd never wanted to go into a nursing home. She's got a beautiful home, loves her garden. As I say, she's got a dog. But when we looked at the cost of living care versus the cost of nursing home care, it was horrendous, to be honest. A good nursing home, you're looking at £4,000 to £5,000 a month, £60,000 a year. Living care was the same cost, £60,000 a year. Plus you've got all your normal day-to-day household expenditure, gas, your electric, your water rate. So we were looking at £80,000 a year for living care. So we just thought that's not an option for us. We can't afford that. And then I remembered a leaflet that someone had handed me outside a store in Petersfield, McDonald Homecare, which is yourselves. And I know you don't want me to plug McDonald Homecare, and I'm not here to plug McDonald Homecare, but that leaflet was life-changing for us, because when I contacted you and you explained how your service works and how it's different to normal living care, and explained the costs involved in that, suddenly that option became affordable, because it is £20,000 a year cheaper than traditional living care. So the cost was then on par with nursing home care, but for a one-to-one live-in service, which has just been fantastic for Mum.
And I guess just picking up on a couple of points. So, I mean, you're a financial planner yourself in your career, but in regards to planning for this, was that ever part of the equation? Did you, as a family, because I know myself with the many years of setting up living care services, it really comes down to the financials versus often the care home,
yes,
versus living care and the costs that are associated. And obviously the care element is completely chalk and cheese,
yes,
one-to-one care in your own home, versus sort of the institutional type of care, situation. So that's not on par, I guess, but it's the financial, because obviously a lot of people would say, or have said to me in the past, it's just unachievable because we actually need to pay for the care. So selling the home as the equity pays for Mum or Dad's care. Yes. So how is it with you guys?
Well, I have to say, Mum is very lucky in that she is from that generation, had the old style final salary pensions, which I think a lot of people in the Petersfield area do. They're very lucky. And being a financial advisor, I have been a bit more aware of this sort of thing. So
Yes.
she is geared up to have financial ability to pay for these things. But I am also aware, being a financial advisor, that you don't necessarily have to sell your own home to pay for this sort of thing, because there are now options with things like equity release mortgages, where you can raise money against the value of your house. And in the old days, where equity release was a dirty word and lots of catches in it, but it's not like that anymore. And if you get good advice, then actually it's much more doable now. And I think bridges that gap between the person not needing full-time nursing home care, and there may be a time when mum needs that, but she doesn't at the moment. But just that few years or however long where the person wants to stay in their own home, you can raise money against the value of your property.
Yeah.
Until in due course, if they do need full-time nursing care, you might then have to sell the property.
I mean, it's really interesting because I didn't know that personally. Completely honest to listeners, I had no idea of the story of you guys, and I know when you contacted me and we started the process of setting up living care, that I had no idea that actually you had looked into it and the costs were just unachievable.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting to know, actually.
Yeah, and it really, at the time, the thought of mum having to go into nursing home with COVID, where nursing homes were locked down,
Yes,
where we wouldn't have been able to see her. And even now, there's a big risk being a nursing home because COVID can just spread through a home. And, it was literally life-changing for us in terms of being able to still see her and know that she was safe. So I think, for some people that don't have sufficient income, then going to a nursing home may be the only option, having to sell home. But for us, with the lower cost, it was suddenly something that we were able to consider that we didn't think we could.
Okay, that's really, really good stuff. And I think the listeners will be really interested to know, sort of, you talked about the period of time where you as a family and you individually were living with your mother and providing that full-time care, to see how that would go. So we're really interested to know how that affected your daughter relationship with your mother firstly, and then actually how that influenced your own personal relationships with, family, friends, and your work situation as well.
Yes, absolutely. Well, as far as me personally was concerned, it was very difficult because trying to work and look after mum didn't leave any time for anything else. And I've got 2 children myself and obviously my husband. So the very little time that was available, I wasn't able to give to them because when I wasn't working, I was with mum. And the relationship with mum was very much, I was a carer and all the responsibilities involved in being a carer and running 2 homes effectively and doing the shopping for her and the cooking for her and the washing and the cleaning. And whenever I was there, I felt I was rushing around doing all that domestic stuff and not spending the time with her that I wanted to, the quality time. I know it sounds a bit of a cliche, but that's what I'm able to do now, is spend quality time with her. So when I see her, because she now has the live-in companion, Annie, who's absolutely amazing, I can now spend that quality time with mum and talk to her and do nice things with her and take her out when we're allowed and not be doing all the other stuff that needed doing to make sure she was safe and well cared for. So it literally has changed our relationship back to how it used to be before all of this, a mother-daughter relationship, not a carer-caree relationship.
That's really amazing. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me, those stories, because obviously we've supported lots of families over the years. Often that is, the families do have that sense of they've got to take that burden. They've really got to take those responsibilities. And I think that's probably achievable up to a point though, isn't it, really? Because it really can, there's been many situations I know that I've worked and supported where there's so much burnout,
Yes,
the stress, the anxiety. There's just so much that can come from that. And I think one of the biggest things, it does really generally affect the whole family relationship that a child has with their parent. The dynamics can really change so dramatically that really often it's a cry for help at that stage, externally, to realize we can't do this. Actually, the most important thing is not only that mother or father has the right care, but actually the children have their lives back and they have that relationship with their parent again, really.
I think for myself and my two sisters, we would have found it so much harder if mum had to go into a nursing home. I think we would have struggled on for longer to try and make things work, and probably really reached burnout stage and crisis stage, because we wouldn't have wanted mum to go into a nursing home. So the fact that we could get live-in care for her and that was affordable just made everything so much better, so much quicker. But yes, it would have been really impossible, I think, to have continued as we were for much longer. It just affected every areas of your life. And I got particularly stressed about work, because if you've got commitments work-wise and you can't fulfill them, I think I probably would have had to seriously thinking about giving up my job to carry on as we were, which clearly I didn't want to do. But we wanted to make sure that mum was safe and cared for and well loved, like she looked after us for all of those years. But I think ultimately it could have ended up causing resentments if we'd carried on like we were, and would have affected the relationship.
Yeah, and it's not just on your side, is it? Because I know myself over the time, actually the person receiving the care or from the family, they can become resentful that, you're taking over and
Absolutely.
You're dominating their life, and you're taking away their independence as well.
And that is one difficulty that we faced initially when considering live-in care, is mum was resistant to it in terms of thinking she was being taken over. So that was one of the challenges that we faced, because, as I mentioned earlier, she felt she was absolutely fine and didn't need any help at all, and didn't want to be taken over and didn't want to be told what to do. Why would she? Nobody would.
Absolutely.
We all would want to live our lives how we want to live them, not be told what to do and when to do it. So that was a challenge that we had to deal with.
I mean, and it's probably good at this stage then just to sort of highlight those challenges, because, obviously I'm a huge advocate of live-in care, and it's obviously great to hear the good stories that do come out of actually providing this type of service for people in the community. But, it's not a miracle service. It's not an instant everything goes magically well and everything, and it's just, it's plain sailing, because, there's lots of stuff to navigate through. So what sort of challenges can you sort of talk about that you faced or your mum faced in accepting and then having live-in care, especially in that first month when
Yes.
it was new for everybody?
Yeah. Yes, I'll be honest, it was difficult to start with, and mum was resistant. She didn't want anybody living in her house with her. Who would? It's not an ideal situation. Ideally, she wouldn't have Alzheimer's, but she has. And we had to come up with a solution that worked for all of us and was a long-term solution. What helped enormously is that you spent time getting to know mum with us and what she was like as a person, and making sure that the girls that you provided to us were right for mum, which they absolutely were. They were both amazing. And initially we spent a lot of time here with mum and the carers, settling in the new arrangements and helping mum to understand why it was necessary, and making sure that they understood what mum needed as well, because actually she is very independent and she doesn't need somebody with her all the time. She just needs someone to support her with certain things, not take over, help her do the things that she needed help with, which is not everything, because there's a lot of things that she's still very capable of doing herself. So she doesn't need, for example, someone putting her coat on for her. She can put her coat on herself, thank you very much. But she needs a little bit of help with cooking. So the girls helping her cook her meals, but not cooking her meals for her. And that sort of understanding of what was needed, and not doing more than what was needed. And mum, actually, she likes her own company. She doesn't need somebody with her all the time, but she needs people with her sometimes. So it was just understanding what was needed for mum. But also we did have to explain to mum, and you helped us with this understanding of this wasn't just for mum, this was for us as well, and that we couldn't continue the way we were, otherwise we would end up burnt out. And once we explained it to mum that this was needed for us as well, then that definitely helped the situation. And now we are 7-8 months down the line, and it's like they've always been here and everything's great.
It's a really interesting point, actually, you talk about where it is often when, it can be explained to the person who's receiving the care, who's obviously quite reluctant to receive the care because obviously in their mind they don't need it. But actually it is for your family. That is one of the key things that I find oftentimes can be a turning point in someone's mind, that they actually see the burden maybe, or the stress, or just the comfort and the reassurance to their loved ones that they receive the care,
And that was difficult because you don't want to show that it is affecting you. We didn't want to upset mum in any way by saying, actually, mum, this is too much for us, because you then have that guilt of not doing the right thing. So it was actually quite a big thing to admit that we were finding it too hard to continue. But once we did, then everything's worked out so much better.
And you were talking about you talked about Annie, who's here at the moment, who's the main care for your mum at the moment, which is fantastic. But there's obviously been other living care workers that have been involved from the beginning as well. So, and I think just picking up on some of the things you said, which I think is really important for listeners who may be, looking for care for their loved ones in the future, maybe, looking into living care as well, that it's really important for them to know, isn't it, actually, that it's trying to match that person as best you can, if you can do, but it's finding someone who can actually adapt to that environment, almost like a chameleon type of person. I like to, for me in my own sort of recruitment and registration of the living care staff, I'm looking for that person who I know can just naturally be a chameleon, because they're going to have to blend in, like with your own situation, your own mother, that she doesn't need all this full support. She doesn't need constant care and companionship and overseeing of everything. She just needs someone to be almost very unobtrusive, or sometimes not even feel like they're there, but they are there at the same time. So just really blending in and making that work so naturally, isn't it, really?
Absolutely. And it's a big ask of someone, isn't it, to live in someone else's home who's not your parent or your relatives. A huge thing anyway.
Yeah, you're right.
And we don't underestimate the difficult job that it is. And for someone to understand and adapt to the person that they're caring for is not easy, which is why we've spent a lot of time trying to develop a relationship with mum's living companions. And as you say, we now have Annie, who is absolutely amazing. And she's just so wonderful with mum and absolutely gets mum. And I think is very genuinely fond of her. And mum is very genuinely fond of her as well. And Annie spends a lot of time keeping us updated and informed with what's happening with mum on WhatsApp groups. So my sisters and I are on a WhatsApp group, and Annie sends us videos and pictures of things she's been doing. And it's just wonderful because we are reassured that mum is happy and safe. And if there are any concerns, Annie will say, what shall I do about this? Or what shall I do about that? And together as a family, we come up with our thoughts on what would be the best way to resolve any difficulties that have overcome it. And Annie's so responsive to that. And as a result, they just have a wonderful relationship. I can't praise her highly enough.
I know you can. And to be honest, yourselves as a family as well, because, I've worked with many different families, and some families geographically are not around, so it's completely different. Some families are, and some families, the dynamics are so different. And even siblings making counter decisions. You talked about the power of attorney side of things, financially or health and welfare. And so it is quite unique sometimes actually to have a full family who's very much on the same track, just really very much involved and engaged in their parents' care, but also to really welcome and make the carer themselves feel like they are valued and part of the wider family, really. And the effects of that are amazing, because it just means that the carer feels like, I don't know, it's a natural part of their job, but they feel welcomed, and it just leads on to that. They don't want to leave. They don't want to look for this other job or this other client that's going to be amazing. It's just the family dynamics add so much value, I believe, anyway, to the way that the whole package works.
Yes, I agree. And I think we do feel that Annie's part of the family. She spent Christmas Day with us, and it's such a big thing having someone live with your parent that you want to develop that relationship with them because they are looking after someone that you dearly love and you want it to be successful, because if it's not successful, you've got another problem and you need to look for something else. So I would encourage anybody that goes down this route to be as actively involved as they possibly can be, because that's what makes it work. And with modern communications, it's easy to do that with WhatsApps and with texting and with Zoom these days with COVID. Annie does that with us. She'll Zoom so we can talk to mum and see her, and she can interact with us even when we can't be here. There's lots of ways to do that now with modern technology. Even if you're not close geographically, I think you could still be very involved. And the more involved you are, the more successful I think the whole living care service will work for you.
Yeah. And I know that you've always really appreciated as a family to actually physically, some of the times, meet the carers that have been here before there's been a decision, or even, like you said, through video chat, to be introduced before they actually come and support your mum with the care as well. So it sort of breaks down those barriers from the very start, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yes, because I think when you see someone face to face, it's a very different relationship to talking on the phone even, or reading something. You just can instantly get a feel of, oh yes, they look really nice and they're smiley, and I think mum would get on with them, because we have had different ages of support for mum. And what we have now with Annie, actually, she's the same age as me. So in a way, she sort of has a daughter relationship with mum, because she's very similar to how we would be with her.
Yeah, it's really interesting with the carers of different age groups, because you do have some younger carers, that actually some older, the whole cross generation and grandchildren. It works so well.
Yes.
But on the other side, sometimes it doesn't, because the life skills of a younger carer compared to maybe a mature carer may not be so much. They haven't run their own home, they haven't raised their own family, which obviously adds a lot of value, doesn't it, as well, in those aspects. Look, Kate, I think the story you've shared so far has been so amazing, and I think it'd be just nice to finish off for listeners, just to any recommendations that you have when maybe people are in this whole cycle of the world of care now, or potentially in the future. What any recommendations to look out for? What recommendation of what they could do, or the options available to them? I think it'd be a nice way just to finish off.
Yeah, I think the first thing is get a diagnosis. And even if that takes time, even if you go initially to your GP and they say everything's fine, if you know in your heart of hearts that your loved one is not okay, keep going back. Because once we got that diagnosis, this whole wealth of support kicked in, which made things so much easier for us. So that would be my first thing. My second thing is, do not dismiss living care as unaffordable. It's not unaffordable. If you go down the route that we have, it's very much affordable. And after all, who doesn't want to stay in their own home with all their own things? And especially with dementia, I think it's very important, because familiarity is really important to mum, and where things start go wrong is when we change her normal routine. So staying in her own house with her own things and her own garden, which she loves, and her dog, who she loves. If she went into a nursing home, she wouldn't be able to have her dog. That is just so important. So don't dismiss living care. I think it is affordable, and our relationship has changed so much for the better because of that.
Wow. Oh, look, Kate, thank you so much. I know this is new for you, and it's so brilliant, because it's not my voice rabbiting on about how good living care is or the options out there. It's just so nice to hear a real life story. I'm sure the listeners really appreciate that, and being vulnerable, putting yourself out there in your mother's care. So look, thanks again, Kate. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.